particular family that Jesus was really close to that lived in a town called Bethany. And we don't know about all of the family members per se, but we do know the three that are mentioned. There's Mary, there's Martha, and their brother Lazarus. You may have heard a little bit about his story before. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about Mary of Bethany and 4 portraits that we see throughout the Bible. The first portrait is of Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. See, back in the day, when a teacher came in, a rabbi, they would sit in a chair, and everyone else would sit down on the ground around them. If you were a student or a disciple of the teacher, you sat down in a little circle around the teacher, something like we just saw a moment ago. The Apostle Paul says in the book of Acts, in chapter 22, that he studied at the feet of Gamaliel. And in Luke chapter 2, verses 46, we have this childhood story of Jesus where Mary and Joseph lost him. And they go looking for him, and they find him in the temple, sitting at the feet of the teacher, answering questions. So we have here in this story of Mary that we're about to read, this unusual kind of circumstance, because Jesus comes in, the rabbi, the teacher, and what typically happened in that culture was when the teacher came in, where were the women? The women were found in the kitchen. That's what they did. They didn't hang around in the living room. They got busy in the kitchen. It may not work well with this. But here in our story, Mary's not found in the kitchen, no. Instead, when Jesus comes and he sits down, where is Mary? She's found down at the feet of the teacher. Martha even comes out of the kitchen, a little frustrated. She's probably, Mary, what are you doing? Finally, she comes out. Jesus, will you tell my sister to get back in this kitchen with me? And what does Jesus say? He says, I'll not take this away from her. She has chosen what is better. There was another phrase that was used to describe someone sitting at the foot of the teacher, the master. And keep in mind, people walked everywhere. People weren't driving in cars. They walked everywhere with sandals on. So what would happen if you're walking on dirt roads, not paved roads, but you're walking on dirt roads all the time? You're kicking up a lot of dust, aren't you? Maybe the bottom of your clothes, certainly your feet have kicked up a lot of dust. So when you sit at the foot of the rabbi, what happens? The rabbi's sitting here, and all of this dirt and this dust is coming off of them. So when you're sitting in this little semicircle around the rabbi, what's happening? They would say you're covered in the dust of the rabbi. If you're sitting at the feet of this teacher, you're sitting in their dirt. You are covered in the dust of the rabbi. Another way that this was used was as a disciple. When you were following behind your teacher, you're a disciple of a rabbi, you want to do everything they're doing. So if they're going to the market, you're going to the market too. And as they're walking in front, you're walking right behind them. You're having these conversations. You're taking copious notes on everything they say. If they're buying oranges that day, I guess you're buying oranges. If they're going over here, you're going over there. So you're following behind your rabbi as close as possible, as close as you possibly can. So what happens if you're following closely behind someone who is walking down dirt roads in sandals? They're kicking up dust. In this instance as well, the dust, the dirt would come on you. And it was considered an honor, because that meant if you were covered in the dust of your rabbi, that you had been following them as closely as you possibly could. It was an honor, whether sitting at the seat or following behind them on the road. It was an honor to be covered in the dust of your rabbi. I was driving down the road one day, and I was following too closely behind another car. And here's how I found out that I was following too closely behind another car. Because they turned on their windshield washers and washed my windshield. That's how I knew I was following a little bit too closely. And I still kind of wonder if they did that on purpose. Not that I've used that technique on others or anything. So whether by walking closely behind the rabbi or sitting at their feet, it was considered an honor to be covered in the dust of the rabbi. There's this saying, you've probably heard it, I've seen it on social media a lot, that's, Jesus is coming, look busy. It's funny and it's a little bit ridiculous, but the truth is, sometimes we can be so busy for the Lord that we forget why we're doing what we're doing. Have you ever been there? You're doing something, why are you doing it? For God. But we lose maybe our joy. We lose the love that we have for Jesus. We get into a routine, and sometimes we're doing things for God. You say, I'm close to God because of the things I'm doing. You should be doing the things because you're close to God, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily close to God. You see the difference. You can continue to do something and lose the heart behind it and forget why you're doing it. And we can lose our joy. We can lose our heart for God and not even realize it. It can just sneak up on us. In Revelation chapter 2, Jesus is speaking to the different churches. And he speaks to the church in Ephesus in those first 7 verses. And at least at first, what Jesus says to the churches in Ephesus is very glowing. I know your church has a reputation for good works. And I imagine what would that be in the context of modern day is that church has an awesome missions program. They're bringing people into the church. They're going out into outreach of the church. They have a wonderful missions program. They're taking care of the widows. They're taking care of the orphans. This church has got it happening. That Jesus says to them in verse 4 that they've forgotten the love they had at first. They have a reputation for good works, but they've forgotten the love they had at first. And now that convicts me because I say, wait a minute, you mean we can do all of the right things and then still miss Jesus? Yes, we can. We can do all of the right things. We can do all of the great missions, and we should do that. We should be on mission in our local community. We should travel often, go do missions. That's wonderful. But we can't forget to love. We have one of our local missions that we do, Compassion Cafe, that is wonderful. And people are serving up food for those who are in need. But they serve up smiles. They serve up prayers for people. You see how people are being fed not just physically, but they're being fed spiritually. That's wonderful. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But what if we're at the serving line, and instead of that smile, instead of that blessing, instead of that how are you doing, there's that expression, that sour expression on our face. We might say, of course I love Jesus. I'm scooping these potatoes, ain't I? We can be in service to God and still miss what He is doing, what He's trying to do in our midst, in our hearts. So here in this first portrait, we have Martha is busy in the kitchen. She's doing what she genuinely thinks that she should be doing. We can't fault her for that. Her default reaction when someone comes in to the home is to be a good hostess. And that's part of the culture of that time. And still to this day, in Middle Eastern cultures, you come into a home, someone's going to bend over backwards for you to be a good host or a good hostess. So we can't fault her for wanting to do that. She's in the kitchen, she's stirring up something, and she's a little upset that Mary's not helping her out. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Without even thinking about it, without even questioning it. You just get in the kitchen and you start doing things. But we learn from this first portrait that it is more important to simply be with Jesus than to look busy. How many of you ever have heard that? We just got to look busy. We've got to be busy with something. We've got to be busy with something. Or have you ever encountered that in your own life, or you've seen that portrayed and put upon you? We've got to look busy. We've got to look busy. Why? Because we'll be busy. Sometimes God calls us to be busy and to roll up our sleeves and be on mission for Him. Maybe it's in our local community, serving up food. Maybe it's down the street a couple hours, taking things out of people's houses from Hurricane Florence. God does definitely call us to serve. But we have to ask ourselves, am I spending time with Jesus? Yes, I should roll up my sleeves and serve. I should metaphorically get in that kitchen. But also, there are times when God just says, be still. Be still and know that I am God. Sometimes we're called to rest in His presence. Sometimes it's time to get out and roll our sleeves up. Sometimes it's time to just fall down at the feet of Jesus and say, I just want what you have to teach me today. I just want to listen. Oftentimes in our prayer life, we can talk at God and with our grocery list of things. And sometimes God says, I won't talk now. I want you to just sit before me and listen. I have something to say to you. I have something for your heart today. If we will listen. Is what we're doing, whatever it is that we're doing, that we say we're honoring Jesus with, are we continuing to do it for the sake of Jesus? Are we trying to honor Jesus? Is what we're doing making us closer to Him? Have we forgotten to love? We don't ever want to be like that church in Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2. We say, well, I have the appearance of good works. I'm doing all this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. Do that. But can we remember to love? Can we be like Mary and sit down at the feet of Jesus and say, yes, I get in the kitchen, great, wonderful, but right now, Jesus is in the house, and I need to be at His feet, listening and learning from Him. Our second portrait of Mary of Bethany comes in John chapter 11. And I want us to look at this text. Martha and Mary have sent word to Jesus that their brother Lazarus is about to die. Now pay attention, there's a few details in here. There's a little bit of math. Just a little bit of basic math. Lazarus is sick. And in verse 5, it's really interesting because it says, because Jesus loved them, He stayed where He was for 2 more days. Because He loved them. That doesn't sound like love, but it is if you get to the rest of the story. Our brother's sick, we need you to do some kind of miraculous thing. Because He loved them, He stayed where He was for 2 more days. And then He travels. After that, He travels in their direction. And it takes Him 2 days to travel. So in total, from the time He got the news to the time that He arrives there, it's 4 days. When He gets there, He finds out that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. So it sounds like He gets the word, Lazarus dies in that moment, and He waits for 2 days. And they travel for 2 days. So really, there was no way in traveling by foot anyway that He was going to save Lazarus that day, was it? How could He have done it? Well, we know from other stories in the gospel that Jesus has the power to heal people from a distance, doesn't He? We see Him doing that. So Jesus could have easily said the word and healed Lazarus in that moment before He ever traveled. But He waits for 2 days. He travels for 2 days and then gets there and finds that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. So you see the basic math here, that Jesus is intentionally doing something here. When Jesus arrived, look at what Martha says to Him in verse 21. Martha comes down and falls down before Him. Verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Now where was Mary? We hear from Martha. We don't have a lot of things reported from Mary. And if you'll notice through these 4 portraits, Mary does not speak a lot. In verse 20, we read that Mary was at home. She was staying with friends. She was at her home, but her friends were staying with her to comfort her in her grief about her brother. So Mary was being comforted by friends. And in verse 28, it says, Jesus tells Martha, get Mary to come here for a minute. And He stays right where He is. Even at this point, He hasn't gone over to the home yet. He hasn't gone to Lazarus' tomb yet. He stayed right where He is. So curious, what is Jesus doing here? And look at verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw Him, she fell at His feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now remember, that first portrait we had of Mary, she didn't speak. She only listened. She was sitting at the feet of Jesus listening. We never hear her speak. In this second portrait, we've heard her say one line. And what's unique about that line? It's verbatim what her sister said just a moment ago. Now, when two people have said the exact same thing on separate occasions to Jesus, you get the impression they've been talking about this. You get the impression that when they're at home after Lazarus has died, they probably have said the same words to each other. You know, if Jesus had been here, our brother wouldn't have died. And then that's what Martha says when she falls at the feet of Jesus. That's what Mary says, the one line she says in the story, when she falls at the feet of Jesus. Now, Martha said something else interesting. Says, even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And if we are to assume that Mary is on the same wavelength as Martha, saying the same thing, then perhaps, just maybe, she believes that same thing that Martha does. I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. We don't really know for sure what she's thinking. We don't have her talk a lot during this story. But her actions in the story speak for her. Because despite everything that's happened, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. What does she do? She falls down at the feet of Jesus. And what we can learn from this portrait, the second portrait, is that we should take all of our requests to Jesus. Lay all of our burdens down at the feet of Jesus. Even when it doesn't seem to make sense. With that kind of attitude that says, God, I'm putting it down before you. I have no idea what you will do with my circumstance at this time. He's been dead for 4 days. This is going to take more than CPR. I don't know what you're going to do, but I know you can do something. Our third portrait comes right after this, and it's in the same chapter, in John chapter 11. In verse 45, we learn that the people who had come to visit Mary have gone with her. Now that's interesting. They have come to comfort her. Jesus says to Martha, bring your sister Mary over. Mary comes to see Jesus, falls at his feet, and everybody who came there with her arrives with Jesus. Now, at this point of the story, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And all of Mary's friends are there with her and see it. Now, some of the friends, they don't believe in Jesus. They go tattletale him. But some of the friends, they see what he has done, and they believe. Now, I don't know about you, but let's say I have a friend whose brother has died. And I'm over at their house, I'm praying with them, I'm sitting with them, and they say, hold on, I'm going to go see this person. And then when they see this person, he raises their brother from the dead, who's been dead after 4 days. Excuse me, I have follow-up questions. I'm going to have some questions for this. I'm going to, what is going on? Does this happen often? What is happening here? And I'm going to have some questions for Jesus. I'm going to have some questions for Mary, who has a history of falling down at the feet of Jesus, of learning at his feet, of falling at his feet when it seems to be no hope. And she's fallen at his feet, and now her brother is alive again. I've got questions. What is going on? And we don't have a recorded dialogue of the conversations that happened between Mary and her friends. Again, there was not a lot of words coming out of Mary's mouth that we have down on Scripture. But what we do know is that Mary is following behind Jesus so closely. And that should be a testament for us. That's the kind of life that we should live. That if you were following behind Jesus so closely, that when people are following behind you, they're going to encounter Jesus. That's the kind of walk that we should have. Yes, we should be intentional. We should be going on missions. There should be things that we're doing on purpose. Say, I'm doing this to reach these people. And we should have intentionality behind what we do. But isn't it wonderful to think that you could have a lifestyle that I wasn't doing this to reach out to people. I just fell down at Jesus' feet because that's what I needed to do. But everybody behind me saw it and believed in Jesus. Everybody behind me witnessed. So if we are following behind Jesus, if we're covered in the dust of our rabbi, if we fall down at his feet when things are rough, when things are tough, when we don't have any reason in the world's eyes to believe in him at that point if we could fall down at the feet of Jesus? Isn't it something to think that other people might see how we respond and how we cling to Jesus and what he does in our lives and say, you know what? I've got some questions. And those conversations can naturally be sparked when we weren't even looking at him. We were just open to it, but we weren't even looking at him. We didn't know we were going to share Jesus today. But the opportunity presents itself. And one more portrait, fourth portrait of Mary of Bethany, before we move on to our fifth and final portrait, is that this one time, she takes this expensive perfume and she uses it to anoint Jesus' feet with it. Now, there are some subtle details in here, and I don't want us to miss them. In the first 7 verses of John 12, we learn that Mary has been keeping a special jar of a very expensive fragrance. And at the end of the story, we learn that she has been keeping that for the day of the Lord's burial, is what he says. Now, whether or not she knew why she was led to keep that, I don't know. But that fragrance, that expensive fragrance, probably the most costly thing she had in the house, has been saved for the day of the Lord's burial. And so in this story, Mary arrives into the room in true Mary fashion. She's very quiet. She's very reverent. Jesus is at the table, and Mary comes down without a word, and she anoints the feet of Jesus with a fragrance that was reserved for his burial. And the scent fills the house. You can't get away from what God's doing in that moment. You can smell it in the air. Judas, one of the disciples who would later betray Jesus, gives her a hard time. You just imagine, Mary is pouring her heart out as she's pouring this fragrance out. And Judas is over there giving her a hard time. Who's this woman? What does she think she's doing? She's supposed to be in the kitchen, right? Who is she that she's over here washing your feet? And this expensive fragrance that she's poured out, she should have sold that and then used the money for the poor. And we learn in the story that Judas wasn't concerned for the poor, that he was the treasurer. He kept the money back. From time to time, he'd reach in that money bag, move it over to his pocket. He was stealing from the treasury, so to speak. So, when Mary of Bethany is doing this, she is losing the most costly thing that belongs to her. And she's at risk of her dignity because she's getting these undignified heckles from the crowd, from Judas. But she puts that out there, knowing that her dignity, it comes from Jesus Christ. It doesn't come from what other people are saying. Her most prized possession isn't that fragrance, but it's Jesus. And being at his feet, anointing his feet, who are about to go to the cross and receive a nail through them, and drying his feet with her hair. That's exactly where she wants to be. Covered, as it were, in the dust of her rabbi. She's willing to serve, and that's what we can learn from this, that she is willing to serve and lay it all out there for Jesus, even if it costs her something. Now, I want to leave you with one more portrait, a fifth portrait. And this time it's different Marys. Scripture records that on the way to the cross, there were women who followed Jesus. Now, you may remember from earlier stories that there were women who followed Jesus in his ministry, and they financed his ministry. And we have these women who are in the crowd going and following Jesus all the way down that road to the cross. Was Mary of Bethany in that group of women? We don't know. We know there was a group of women. She could have been in that crowd watching all of this. Or it could be like when her brother Lazarus died. Perhaps seeing all this happen, she's at home and she's grieving, and maybe she has friends with her. But this is the people that we do know were here in this group. We have Mary, Jesus' mother, who had watched his little feet as a baby and watched those feet go everywhere, preaching the good news as he grew to be a man. We have Mary Magdalene, not to be confused with Mary of Bethany. Sometimes in history around the Reformation, people confuse those two. Those are two different people. Mary Magdalene, out of whom Jesus had cast several demons. And she traveled with Jesus, and she financed his ministry out of the thankfulness in her heart for what he had done for her. That was really unique because in that culture, women were undervalued. To have a woman whose learning from Jesus and who was following and financing him, and the group of women that was countercultural. We see this early Jesus movement is very countercultural. Women are valued and a part of what is happening in a way that other cultures around them did not do. And third, we have Mary, the wife of Clopas, who is the sister-in-law of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, I know that can get confusing. We talked this morning about 4 different Marys, but I want to put it into perspective. I've found in every church in which I've served, there is at least one name that gets repeated frequently amongst the people. We have here 2 Bills. We have 2 Barbaras, 2 Carolyns. 4 today. 4, goodness. We have 2 Carolyns, and we have 2 women named Jennifer Lewis. Christmas cards get really interesting. So just like we have common names that show up a lot, Mary was a common name in that time period. And we call these 3 women the 3 Marys. Now, there's something that's always interesting to me in this story, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but we have read before this that the disciples have scattered. Peter tried to act out in violence when Jesus was arrested, but after that, what does he do? He denies Jesus. He claims that he's not with Jesus. He kind of follows back at a distance and watches what happens. And we read, without a lot of detail, but the disciples scatter. They're scared at what is happening. But when we read about these women, if this is the cross, they come right up to it. So to me, that always seems like it takes a lot of guts. That people don't want to be associated with Jesus on that day because he's being crucified, and if you're with him, you might be crucified too. And what do these women do? They come right to the foot of the cross. And what we know from history is that given how big the cross would have been and how it would have been driven into the ground, that yes, Jesus was up in the air, he was raised up in the air, but his feet would have come down to about eye level. We have a lot of artistic depictions showing that. There's even, if you watch the movie The Passion of the Christ, what do we see Mary, his mother, do? She reaches out a trembling hand to touch the feet of her son that had been folded one over another with a nail driven through them into the cross. These women are there to see Jesus. Plain and simple. Nothing else is stopping them. And something we learn from their story is going boldly to Jesus and living out your faith, even though it might put you in danger, even though it might cost you something. We see Mary probably crying her eyes out in a way that she probably can't even see straight or think straight. She's at the foot of the cross of Jesus. And Jesus is up on the cross, dying slowly. And he looks down from the cross and he sees Mary, his mother. And he sees one disciple that is there, John, the beloved disciple. Jesus was very close to his disciples. He was very close to Peter, and a deeper kind of closeness to Peter, and an even deeper kind of closeness to John, who is called the beloved disciple. And he looks down at John, and he might be thinking, what is John going to do? I'm so close to John. What is John going to do now? He looks at his mother, Mary, and widows in that time, which we believe that Mary was probably a widow. Her husband Joseph had probably died by that point. Widows were not always taken care of well. They didn't have a lot of power and status, and if their husband wasn't taking care of them, it would fall to their son to try to take care of them. But here, her son's up on the cross. What is she going to do? And Jesus looks down and tells John, "Behold your mother." And he tells his mother, "Behold your son." That they're taking care of each other in a way. And that John is going to take Mary into his home. And that he's going to care for her. So it's amazing in this portrait that we see with the 3 Marys that Jesus is up on the cross, slowly dying, and he's in agony. And what does he do? He takes care of the needs of his people with what are some of his final breaths. We know from research that when someone's hanging on the cross, there's 2 ways you can die. It's from your organs shutting down during the process, or from the suffocation from all of this impact on your lungs. It's hard to draw a breath. It's harder to talk. But Jesus is on the cross, taking care of our eternal salvation, but also taking care of the earthly needs of one of his disciples and of his mother in that moment. we see that we can't outgive God. It was probably a pretty bold and risky move to be that close to the cross, even riskier for a disciple. You'd say, yes, I'm giving that to God, and that's wonderful. But here's God giving his life as a sacrifice for the world, and even taking care of the earthly needs of two individuals down the cross. We can't outgive God. At the feet of the teacher, of Jesus, we learn the way to the Father. And it's Jesus alone who is the truth, the way, and the life. His feet walked the world, walked across the earth, showing us how we were really supposed to live. Yes, Jesus died for us on the cross, but he also, in his life, he showed us how we are supposed to live. His feet took the nail on the cross that was meant for you and for me. In gratitude, we should also fall down at the feet of Jesus. Even when it doesn't seem like there's any earthly way for our needs to be met, for our problems to be solved, we should fall down at the feet of Jesus. And may we also bring others along with us to the feet of Jesus, just as Mary of Bethany did for those friends of hers who surely had questions of her. As Mary, the mother of Jesus, did when she brought her sister-in-law with her to the foot of the cross. And as Mary Magdalene did as she followed and financed Jesus' ministry. And though we no longer have the custom of washing people's feet in our homes when they come in, may we be a people who, in our love for each other, maybe we're not washing their feet, but we're washing their souls as we're pouring out love on each other. May we be in relationship with others, helping to cleanse the dirt off of them as we show love to them. And when people see us, may we be covered in the dust of our Master's feet. I hope we're encouraged this morning to get down and roll our sleeves up and to be willing to get a little dirty in serving others. In a moment, we're going to have communion together. And communion is a wonderful time when we remember the sacrifice of Jesus up on that cross, symbolized in the bread and in the juice, which is respectively his body broken for us and his blood poured out for us. You'll notice there are 4 tables set up. In a moment, as we play a song, you're going to go up to the table, you're going to get a little cup of juice, a little piece of bread, you're going to return to your seats, and then after the song finishes playing, we will enjoy communion together. In Matthew 26, verse 26, we read, "While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, 'Take and eat. This is my body.'" Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." This morning, if you do not know Jesus Christ, or even if you know him, but you're going through something, we invite you to come and kneel before the altar and pray. I can have prayer with you. However the Lord leads you this morning, perhaps he leads you to join this church, this family of faith. However he leads you this morning, won't you please come forward as we sing this final song.